My name is Christine Cole. I'm 32 years old, and I work as a financial analyst in Boise, Idaho. That day was supposed to be a warm and joyful Thanksgiving dinner, but instead, my parents handed me a special gift. Inside wasn't what I expected. It was a notice for my brother's $250,000 debt from a failed business venture. My dad glared at me and said, "You're going to pay this." I refused without hesitation. In the next instant, he grabbed his wine glass and flung the contents straight into my face. The cold liquid splashed across my cheeks and soaked through the front of my shirt. My mom jumped up from her chair and shouted, "Get out!" I stood there completely stunned, wine dripping down my chin and onto the floor, struggling to process that the people humiliating me were my own parents. If you were standing in my place at that moment, would you stay quiet and take it, or would you stand up and refuse to accept it? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd really like to hear what you would have done. Just a week before that disaster of a dinner, I had been in my apartment packing up my camping gear, excited about a weekend trip to Sawtooth National Forest. I've lived in Boise, Idaho for about 6 years now, in a cozy little apartment that I managed to buy completely on my own. At 32, working as a financial analyst, I earn around $180,000 a year. It didn't come easily. I spent years studying, working overtime, and pushing myself to get where I am. My apartment isn't huge, but it's perfect for me. Hardwood floors that creak a little when I walk, a wide window overlooking part of the city skyline, and a quiet atmosphere that lets me clear my head after long days of analyzing spreadsheets and reports. I don't need luxury or extravagance. What matters most to me is my independence and the small circle of friends who actually care about me. The camping trip to Sawtooth was supposed to be my break from everything. I had planned it carefully with a couple of friends. We were going to hike along the forest trails, cook over a fire, sleep under a sky full of stars, and forget about work deadlines and quarterly reports for a few days. I had spent weeks looking forward to it. I checked my 10 for holes, organized my backpack, mapped out hiking routes online, and even bought new trail snacks for the trip. That's when my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I glanced down and saw a message from my mom. The text was short and simple. "Come to Idaho Falls for Thanksgiving. We miss you." I stared at the screen longer than I expected to. I hadn't been back to my parents' house in 2 years. Not since the last holiday gathering where my brother once again became the center of attention, while I faded quietly into the background like always. Growing up, our family dynamic had always been clear. My brother was the golden child. He was captain of the football team in high school, popular with everyone, charming and loud, the kind of person who could walk into a room and immediately have everyone laughing. Meanwhile, I was the quiet one, the one who stayed up late studying, who worked summer jobs and saved every dollar. Mom used to say, "You're so responsible, Christine." But it never sounded like real praise. It always carried a different meaning, like responsibility was simply the role I was expected to play, so the rest of the family could rely on me when things went wrong. I sat down on my couch and reread her message again and again. Memories of Idaho Falls started creeping back into my mind. Summers helping my mom in the kitchen while my brother joked around with dad in the living room, rolling out dough for pies together, laughing at old family stories. For a few brief moments during those times, I sometimes felt like I truly belonged. But those moments were rare. More often than not, I felt invisible. My brother's loud personality filled every space, while my accomplishments barely got a passing nod. The last time I had visited, he had spent most of dinner bragging about a huge real estate investment he claimed would make him rich. Mom and Dad listened like he was some kind of business genius. I sat quietly at the table, smiling politely and keeping my opinions to myself. I had learned years ago that speaking up rarely changed anything. Part of me wanted to ignore the message completely.
I already had my camping trip planned. My tent was packed, the campsite was reserved, and my friends were counting on me. But another part of me, the small, stubborn part that still hoped for a real family connection, hesitated. What if this time was different? What if they genuinely wanted me there? I thought about Mom's apple pie, the way she used to hug me when I walked through the door, Dad's terrible jokes at the dinner table that always made everyone groan. Maybe I had been too harsh. Maybe they actually did miss me. Eventually, I called my friend Sarah to cancel the camping trip. "You're ditching us for your family?" she said jokingly, but I could hear a slight edge in her voice. "They don't deserve you, Christine." I laughed it off, pretending it didn't bother me, but her words stuck with me. My friends knew the stories. They knew how my parents constantly expected me to fix problems while my brother got away with reckless decisions. Still, I convinced myself that this Thanksgiving could be a chance to reconnect, a chance to feel like I belonged somewhere again. I sent a reply to my mom. "I'll be there." She responded almost immediately with a simple heart emoji. For a brief moment, it warmed me. But as I unpacked my camping gear and started preparing for the drive to Idaho Falls, doubt slowly crept back in. Something about the message felt strange, too short, too formal, almost like it had been carefully planned. Why now? They hadn't called me in months, not even on my birthday. My brother's name kept surfacing in my thoughts. The last time I saw him, he had hinted at having financial problems. Dad brushed it off immediately, insisting everything was under control. I hadn't believed it then, and I didn't completely believe it now. My brother had always been careless with money, spending as if his bank account had no limits. I tried to push those thoughts away. Maybe I was just overthinking things. Maybe it really was just a normal family dinner. 3 hours later, I was driving down the highway toward Idaho Falls. When I finally pulled up in front of my parents' house, my heart started beating faster.
The late November air was cold and crisp, but I barely noticed. My head was full of mixed emotions, hope, nervousness, and a strange unease I couldn't explain. I grabbed the gift bags from the back seat of my car, a bottle of wine for Dad, a silk scarf for Mom, and a finance book for my sister-in-law that I thought she might enjoy. I had spent hours choosing those gifts because I wanted them to know I cared, even if I wasn't sure they felt the same way. As I walked up the porch steps, the front door opened before I could even knock. Dad pulled me into a surprisingly tight hug. "You made it," he said loudly, sounding more enthusiastic than I remembered. Mom appeared behind him with a wide smile and took my coat. "It's been far too long," she said warmly while guiding me inside. The familiar smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon filled the house, instantly bringing back memories of childhood Thanksgivings. My brother and his wife were already standing in the living room near the fireplace. My brother greeted me with his usual confident grin, the one that always seemed to smooth over any trouble he caused. "Hey sis," he said, patting my shoulder like we were old friends catching up. My sister-in-law gave a polite nod and smiled faintly, though her eyes seemed to study me carefully, almost like she was measuring something. I handed out the gifts. Dad admired the wine bottle with approval. Mom wrapped the silk scarf around her neck immediately and thanked me. My sister-in-law flipped through the finance book and said thanks quickly. But the entire exchange felt oddly rehearsed, like everyone was following a script I hadn't been given. Soon we all sat down at the dining table, which was set beautifully with Mom's best dishes. A golden roasted turkey sat in the center, surrounded by mashed potatoes covered in gravy and green beans sprinkled with almonds. It looked exactly like the Thanksgiving dinners I remembered from childhood, when I used to help Mom set the table while my brother fooled around nearby. For a moment, I allowed myself to believe things might really be normal again. I took a sip of wine and tried to relax, but a strange tension kept building in my stomach. Something felt wrong. Their smiles seemed a little too bright. Their questions felt oddly focused. Mom started asking about my job, my apartment, and my savings, topics she had never cared about before. "You're doing so well," she said, her tone curious in a way that almost felt investigative. Dad nodded quickly beside her, as if waiting for something. My brother dominated the conversation like he always did, describing a massive real estate project he claimed would be a huge success. "It's a total game changer," he said confidently while leaning back in his chair with his arms crossed. My sister-in-law chimed in, praising his ambition, but her eyes kept flicking toward me again and again. I forced myself to smile politely and nod along, but my mind kept racing.
She'd accessed my account, my private finances, without my permission. The violation hit me like a punch. I'd spent years building that safety net, working late nights, skipping vacations, while my brother spent money on whatever he wanted. And now they were using my hard work against me, like it was theirs to claim. "This isn't fair," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "Why is this my problem?" My brother finally spoke, his voice smooth but edged with frustration. "Come on, sis. It's just money. We're family. You can't let us lose everything." His words stung, not because they were true, but because they weren't. Family didn't mean this. Lying, scheming, digging into my life like I owed them. I looked at the bank notice again, the words "failed startup" glaring at me. I didn't believe it. My brother's history of bad deals and flashy purchases flashed through my mind, but I had no proof yet. Dad leaned closer, his face hardening. "You've got the means," he said. "You're sitting on all that money, and you're going to let your brother's life fall apart? What kind of daughter does that?" His words cut deep, not because I felt guilty, but because they confirmed what I'd always feared. They didn't see me as their daughter. Not really. They saw me as a solution, a checkbook to fix their mistakes. Mom nodded, her eyes pleading but cold. "We're counting on you," she said. "This is what families do." I pushed the paper back into the box, my hands steady now, despite the rage building inside. "No," I said, my voice clear. "I'm not paying this." The room went silent. My brother's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing like I'd betrayed him. My sister-in-law's calm mask slipped, her lips pressing into a thin line. Mom's face fell, but there was something else there. Anger, maybe, or desperation. Dad's hands clenched, his knuckles white. I could feel their disappointment, their judgment pressing down on me, but I held my ground. "You're being selfish," my sister-in-law said, her voice low, almost a hiss. "You think you're better than us, don't you?" I wanted to scream, to tell her she had no right to my money, my life, but I didn't. I just stared back, my heart pounding, feeling the weight of their betrayal. They'd planned this, all of them, before I even walked through the door. The warm welcome, the dinner, the smiles, it was all a setup to trap me. I felt like a fool for hoping, for thinking this could be a real family moment. The box sat in my lap, heavy with their expectations, and I knew nothing would be the same after this. I pushed the box away, my voice firm. "I'm not paying his debt," I said, staring at Dad, daring him to argue. His face twisted, a flush creeping up his neck. Mom's hands clenched on the coffee table, her eyes narrowing like I'd betrayed her. My brother shot forward, his voice sharp. "You're really going to let us lose everything?" He snapped, his charm gone, replaced by a raw edge of desperation. My sister-in-law crossed her arms, her glare cold and accusing. "You're supposed to help family," she said, her words dripping with judgment, as if I'd broken some unspoken vow. I shook my head, the crumpled banknote still in my hand. "This is his mess," I said, pointing at my brother. "Why am I the one who has to clean it up?" My voice trembled, not from fear, but from years of frustration boiling over. I'd always been the one to fix things, to step up when they needed me. But this was different. This was my brother's failure, not mine, and I was done carrying their weight. The silence that followed was heavy, their eyes boring into me, waiting for me to crack. Dad stood abruptly, his chair scraping the floor. He grabbed his wine glass, his knuckles white around the stem. "You ungrateful child," he spat, his voice shaking with anger. Before I could move, he flung the wine at me. It splashed across my face, cold and sharp, stinging my eyes and soaking my shirt. The liquid dripped down my chin, pooling on the floor, and I stood frozen, the shock hitting me like a wave. My breath caught, my heart pounding, as the reality sank in. My own father had done this? In front of everyone? Without a hint of regret? Mom gasped, but her face hardened almost instantly.
She stood, her voice icy. "If you won't help your brother, you're not welcome here," she said, each word cutting deeper than the wine. "Get out." I stared at her, my chest tight, waiting for her to take it back, to show some flicker of guilt. She didn't. My brother looked away, his jaw tight, refusing to meet my eyes. My sister-in-law's lips twitched into a faint smirk, like she'd expected this all along. Grandpa sat in the corner, his hands folded, watching silently, his face unreadable. The anger surged inside me, hot and unstoppable. "You're choosing him over me," I said, my voice low but steady, each word deliberate. "After everything I've done, this is how you treat me?" I wiped the wine from my face, my sleeve now stained red, my hands trembling with fury. They'd planned this, manipulated me from the moment I walked in, and now they were throwing me out because I wouldn't give in. The betrayal burned deeper than I'd ever felt. But it also made something clear. I didn't owe them anything. I grabbed my coat from the chair, my movements sharp, deliberate. "You don't get to do this," I said, looking at Mom, then Dad, then my brother. "You don't get to guilt me into fixing his mistakes." My brother opened his mouth, but I cut him off. "No, I'm done." My voice was louder now, fueled by years of being overlooked, of being the one who always had to be responsible. My sister-in-law scoffed, muttering something about me being selfish, but I didn't care. Her words couldn't touch me anymore. I walked toward the door, my wet shirt clinging to my skin, the smell of wine sharp in my nose. Dad's face was still red, his hands clenched, but he didn't say a word. Mom stood rigid, her eyes cold, like I was a stranger. My brother stayed silent, his head bowed, avoiding my gaze. Grandpa's eyes followed me, but he didn't speak. Not yet. I wanted to scream, to tell them how wrong they were, but I didn't. Words wouldn't change them. They'd made their choice, and I'd made mine. I stepped outside, the November air hitting my wet clothes, chilling me to the bone. My car was still in the driveway, right where I'd left it hours ago, when I'd walked in, hoping for a family moment. That hope was gone now, replaced by a clarity I hadn't felt before. I wasn't their scapegoat anymore. I slid into the driver's seat, my hands gripping the wheel, my anger still burning, but mixed with something else, relief. I didn't look back as I started the engine. This was the end of their hold on me. Grandpa rose to his feet, his voice slicing through the heavy silence. The living room, tense after my departure, seemed to shrink under his gaze.
I remembered how the last time I saw him, he hinted at financial trouble before Dad shut the topic down immediately. Now, his confidence felt exaggerated, almost like he was trying too hard to prove something. I glanced at Mom, who was cutting her turkey carefully while avoiding eye contact with me. Dad laughed loudly at one of my brother's comments, but the sound felt hollow. As dinner continued, the tension kept growing. Every time I tried to steer the conversation toward neutral topics, like a recent project at work or a new restaurant I liked in Boise, they redirected the focus back to me, my job, my apartment, my finances. "You must have built up quite a nest egg by now," my sister-in-law said casually, though the sharpness behind her voice didn't go unnoticed. I brushed it off, saying I was careful with money, but the words felt heavy in my mouth. My brother leaned forward, his grin fading for a split second. "You're smart like that," he said, but it didn't sound like a compliment. It sounded like a calculation. I pushed my plate away, my appetite gone. The warmth of the meal, the familiar smells, couldn't mask the unease creeping up my spine. I thought about the text from Mom, how it had pulled me here despite my doubts. I'd wanted to believe in a family moment, but now, sitting at this table, I felt like a guest in a house I didn't know anymore. Their laughter, their questions, their glances, it all felt like a setup. I gripped my glass, trying to shake the thought, but it wouldn't leave. Whatever they wanted, it wasn't just a Thanksgiving dinner. After dinner, we moved to the living room for the gift exchange. The fireplace crackled, casting a warm glow, but the air felt heavy, like the tension from the table had followed us. Mom handed out the presents I'd brought, Dad's wine, her scarf, my sister-in-law's finance book, and they smiled, thanking me again, but their voices sounded rehearsed. My brother leaned back on the couch, his arm around his wife, watching me with a look I couldn't quite read. "Your turn," Mom said, her smile tight, as she handed me a small, neatly wrapped box. I took it, expecting something simple, a trinket, maybe a family keepsake. My fingers fumbled with the ribbon, and I forced a smile, trying to ignore the knot in my stomach. Inside the box was a single folded paper. I unfolded it, my eyes scanning the text, and my heart stopped. It was a bank notice, official and cold, stating my brother owed $250,000 for a failed startup. I stared at the numbers, my mind racing to make sense of it. "What is this?" I asked, my voice low, looking up at Mom. She glanced at Dad, who cleared his throat and leaned forward, his hands clasped. "It's your brother's dead," he said, his tone firm, like he was stating a fact I should already accept. "The business didn't work out. We need you to cover it." I blinked, the paper trembling in my hands. My brother's eyes were on me, unblinking, his grin gone. My sister-in-law shifted closer to him, her face calm but expectant. "You're doing so well, Christine," Mom said, her voice soft but sharp, like she was trying to soothe me into agreement. "You've always been the responsible one. This is for the family." I looked at her, then at Dad, then at my brother, waiting for someone to say this was a mistake. No one did. The room felt smaller, the air thicker, like I was being cornered.
How do you even know I can pay this? I asked, my voice sharper now. My sister-in-law spoke up, her tone matter of fact. I work at the bank. I saw your savings, $700,000. You can afford it. My stomach dropped.
Dad sat rigid, fists still clenched. Mom kept her eyes fixed on the floor, avoiding him. My brother shifted uneasily, while my sister-in-law sat stiff, her face pale. For most of the evening, he had stayed quiet in the corner, just watching, but now his presence filled every inch of the room. "I've had enough," he said, low but sharp. "You think you can treat her like this and lie to everyone?" His trembling hand pointed at Dad, then at my brother. That debt wasn't from a startup. It was from gambling in Nevada casinos, cars, trips to Europe. His words struck like a slap. Mom's head snapped up, her mouth open but speechless. Dad's face went pale, his jaw tight. My brother tried to speak, but the elder cut him off with blazing eyes. "Don't you dare deny it." Slowly, he paced across the floor, cane tapping against the wood. "I saw the transactions in the family account. $250,000 gone. Casinos, a BMW, flights to Paris. And I heard you." He turned toward Dad, plotting with him to hide it, to trick Christine into paying. My sister-in-law's eyes widened, her hands twisting in her lap. She opened her mouth, but he silenced her with a raised hand. "You knew too. You checked her savings and thought you could guilt her into fixing this mess." The accusation lingered, undeniable. Dad rose, his voice shaky. "You don't understand." But the old man cut him short. "I understand plenty," he snapped. "You threw wine in her face, told her to leave her own home, all to cover his lies." He pointed at my brother, who shrank back, stripped of his usual bravado. Mom covered her face, shoulders trembling. My sister-in-law pressed her lips tight, no longer smirking. Their excuses collapsed under his fury. "I raised you better than this," his voice broke. "Christine's the only one who's been honest, and you treated her like dirt." His eyes softened for a moment, as if thinking of me. "She deserves to know the truth." With deliberate fingers, he pulled out his phone and dialed my number. The room froze in silence as he waited. Halfway back to Boise, my phone rang. Seeing his name, I pulled over, my heart pounding. "Christine," he said, voice heavy but steady. "You need to know what your brother really did." He told me everything. How the debt wasn't from a startup, but from gambling. How the money went to casinos, a BMW, and luxury trips. He explained how he had seen the family account transactions and overheard Dad and my brother scheming to force me to pay. My hands gripped the wheel, anger flaring but sharpened by clarity. "They lied to you." Grandpa's voice softened. "Your sister-in-law checked your savings. They all thought they could manipulate you." I closed my eyes, betrayal cutting deeper than ever. I had doubted my brother's story, but hearing it laid out, the casinos, the lies, their plan to use me made my stomach churn. His anger mirrored Ryan, steadying me. "I couldn't let them get away with it," he said. "Not after what they did to you." I whispered my thanks before hanging up. The road stretched ahead, dark and empty, but my thoughts burned. They had planned to ruin me, to take everything I'd built. Dad's wine, Mom's cold words, my brother's silence. It all made sense now. They weren't just desperate. They were deceitful, ready to sacrifice me to save themselves. Back in Boise, I threw myself into my routine. My apartment, small but mine, became my sanctuary. I focused on work, long hours at the office, where I'd earned every cent of my savings. I started running again, the cold air clearing my head with every step. I didn't need their approval anymore, didn't need their expectations dragging me down. For the first time in years, I felt light, like I'd shed a burden I'd carried too long. I wasn't the beautiful daughter or the responsible sister anymore. I was just me, and that was enough. Word about what happened spread fast. Grandpa didn't hold back after that night. He told Aunt Martha and Uncle Stephen, Mom's sister and brother-in-law, the whole story. How my brother's debt came from casinos in Nevada, not some failed startup. How Dad and Mom tried to cover it up. How they turned on me when I refused to pay. Aunt Martha called me a week later, her voice soft but firm. "We're on your side," she said. "What they did was wrong." Uncle Stephen, usually quiet, sent a text. "You don't deserve that." Their support wasn't loud, but it was steady, a reminder that not everyone in the family had betrayed me. In Idaho Falls, things unraveled for Dum. My brother couldn't dodge the bank forever. The $250,000 he owed wasn't going away, and with no one to bail him out, he had to face it. He and his sister-in-law sold their house, a big flashy place they'd bought to show off. I heard from Aunt Martha that it went for less than they hoped, barely enough to cover the debt. They moved into a small apartment on the edge of town, a far cry from the life they'd flaunted. My brother's charm didn't work anymore. People in town whispered about his gambling, his recklessness. My sister-in-law kept her job at the bank, but her reputation took a hit. No one trusted someone who'd pried into private accounts to manipulate family. Dad and Mom didn't fare much better. They'd always been pillars in their community,
church events, charity drives, the works. But word got out, as it always does in small towns. Neighbors stopped inviting them to gatherings. Friends grew distant, their smiles polite but cold. Aunt Martha told me Mom tried to explain it away at a book club, claiming it was all a misunderstanding. But no one bought it. The truth was too ugly. They'd chosen to protect my brother's lies over their own daughter. Uncle Stephen, who'd always been close to Dad, stopped visiting. He didn't say why, but the reason was clear. They'd crossed a line, and the community they'd leaned on for years turned its back. I didn't gloat. I didn't want to. Knowing they were paying for what they did didn't erase the hurt, but it gave me closure. I'd spent years trying to hold the family together, always the one to compromise, to forgive. But that night in Idaho Falls changed everything. They'd shown who they really were, and I wasn't going to let them pull me back into their mess. I stopped checking my email for apologies that never came.
I stopped waiting for them to change. Grandpa was the only one I kept in touch with. His calls, a quiet comfort. He didn't push, didn't preach, just asked how I was, told he was proud. Boise became my home in a way it hadn't before. I joined a running group, made a few friends who didn't know my family's story, didn't need to. Work kept me busy, but it was more than that. I was building something for myself, something they couldn't touch. I opened a new savings account, one my sister-in-law would never see. Every deposit felt like a step forward, a brick in the wall I was building around my life. I wasn't rich, but I was secure, and that was mine to keep. Sometimes late at night I'd think about them. Dad's angry glare, Mom's cold words, my brother's silence. The memories stung, but they didn't control me anymore. I'd spent so long trying to be what they wanted, but now I was free to be what I wanted. I didn't need their house, their approval, or their lies. I had my own life, my own strength, and that was enough. Months passed in Boise, my days calm. I'd settled into a rhythm that felt like mine alone. No calls from Mom, no texts from Dad, no pleas for my brother. The silence was deliberate, a wall I'd built to protect myself. My apartment, with its familiar creaks and warm light, was my refuge. I'd wake early, run along the Boise River, the steady beat of my steps grounding me. Work filled my hours, each project a step toward a future I controlled. I wasn't running from the past, I was building beyond it. Grandpa was the only one I still talked to. His calls came every few weeks, his voice steady, asking about my day or sharing small updates. He never pushed me to forgive or forget, and I respected him for that. Aunt Martha and Uncle Stephen checked in too, their messages brief but kind, a quiet reminder of the family I hadn't lost. But Mom, Dad, my brother, my sister-in-law, they were gone from my life. I didn't check their social media, didn't ask about them. The hurt they'd caused was a closed chapter one. I had no interest in reopening. Looking back, I realized how much I'd learned. Family isn't a debt you owe forever. Sometimes the people closest to you can hurt you the most, not because they're evil, but because they're flawed, caught in their own mistakes. I used to think love meant saying yes to every demand, fixing every problem. But that night in Idaho Falls taught me something different. Setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's survival. Walking away from my family's lies, their pressure, their betrayal, was the hardest thing I'd ever done. It was also the strongest. I'm proud of the life I've built. My savings are mine, earned through years of discipline. My friends, my routines, my choices, they're mine too. I don't carry the weight of my brother's debt or my parents' expectations anymore. I've learned to protect my peace, to value myself even when others don't. It's not about cutting people out to punish them. It's about choosing who gets to share your space, your energy. If you're watching this, think about your own boundaries. Maybe you're facing pressure from family, feeling guilt for saying no. Ask yourself, are they respecting you or are they using you? You don't have to carry their burdens to prove your love. Stand up for yourself, even if it's hard, even if it means walking away. Your worth.